Welcome back to This Is Working. I'm Dan Roth, editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. On this show, we talk to leaders who have a significant impact on society and the way we live and work now. This week, we're breaking down what you need to know about leading through an economic downturn. And today, my guest is Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank. Christine Lagarde has spent her entire career blazing trails through the global landscape in finance and politics to get where she is today as president of the European Central Bank. It's a leadership journey that's called for considerable tenacity and resilience. She has said, quote, "For women to get to the top, you need skin as thick as a crocodile." She's pushed through barriers to achieve many firsts in industries typically dominated by men. She was the first female in the role of chairman at the international law firm Baker McKenzie. From there, she went on to become the first woman to be appointed as France's finance minister, and later the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, where she was entrusted with the stability of the global monetary system in the midst of a financial crisis. Now leading the European Central Bank, another first, she's been tasked with the challenge of controlling inflation as the European Union recovers from the impact of a global pandemic. So as the world celebrates the achievements of women this week on International Women's Day, it's not surprising that Lagarde is focused on making sure the paths she opened up become highways. She says, quote, "When women do better, economies do better." It's a stance that drives her efforts to bring more equality and inclusion to the workforce. President Lagarde, welcome to This Is Working.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great having you here. So you sit on incredible data at the ECB, and you have your own personal insights about the unique challenges that women face in achieving economic success. I'd love to understand from you how this current economy in particular helps or is holding women back.
Well, first of all, you should know, can I call you Dan?
Please, yes.
And you call me Christine, please.
That'll work.
Okay. You need to know that a central bank governor typically only talks about monetary policy. And price stability is the key compass. Financial stability is also an important matter, but typically price stability is the whole purpose of what we do. When I was appointed and when I was approved by the European Parliament, I asked for two special exemptions. I said, I will focus my energy and my effort on monetary policy, and my compass will be price stability. But bear in mind that if you elect me to be president of the ECB, I will want to continue talking about women, gender equality and equity, and I will want to talk about climate change. And that is something that was granted to me. So I feel very comfortable talking about this issue of how does the economy work for women at the moment. And I have to tell you something. Ever since COVID, I believe that women have been more exposed, more vulnerable, and more victim of the current economic situation. Now, you'll say, why is that so? If you look back at, early 2019, when COVID hit, you remember we were talking about those on the front line. Many of those on the front line were women. We were talking about kids being at home and everybody being locked down. Who was looking after kids? Who was looking after the elderly? Who was trying to keep some sort of balance in this very, very strange, disturbed way of living? It was the woman. In those days, pretty much across the world, in advanced and less advanced economies, there was more domestic violence. Who were the victims? Women. So the whole COVID period and subsequent recovery was a very difficult moment and a very difficult economic phase for women. Now, because we are taking one shock after the other, post-COVID, post-recovery, we are now being hit by very high energy prices that have led to inflation, which is sort of feeding on its own. I won't go into details, but those who are the prime victims and the first ones to suffer from inflation are the most vulnerable. When you think of it, single parent families in particular are taking the hit. Single parent families, that rings like women. So I would say that the current economic situation and this succession of shocks that we have suffered from COVID thereon till now have particularly hit women. And it's a fact that is, demonstrated by what I have just mentioned. We are seeing it, we know it, and I'm very concerned about it. One additional fact, because education was restrained during the COVID period, a lot of kids actually miss out school. Well, guess what? Those that missed out most and did not catch up were little girls. Less so in advanced economies, but on a global basis, very much so.
So it sounds like you're laying out a need for both governments and private businesses to play a role here in erasing these equity challenges of the last couple of years. Do you have things in particular you are looking for that you want to see done? Are there examples of what in your mind has, or what in the data has worked or not worked?
I'm going to borrow from previous experience at the IMF in particular, because we at the time did a lot of research and work on what's missing. And I use my 4 Ls. The first one is the law. There are still many countries around the globe where the law itself, whether it's the constitution or the law or secondary legislation, includes discriminatory provisions that are setting women aside. So that's number one. And what we see is that when the law is equal for all and reestablishes equity and equality, then it improves the situation. And we've seen many instances of that. So that's my first L. The second L for me is learning. Investing in girls' education, making sure that there is access to knowledge and to education for a decent period of time for all girls is also critically important. There was a G7 meeting back in Canada about 4 years ago where all the advanced economies committed to do at least 7 years of education for all girls. I think that needs to be delivered upon. My third L is labor. The labor market has to be accessible to all women. And any discrimination, any gender gap that is translating into salary differences has to be filled. I think, the Secretary General of the United Nations just recently indicated that if we carry on the way we do, it will take 300 years to close that gap. Well, we have to be better than that. We have to close that gap at a much faster pace. And I think that one of the things that the corporate world can do is really look into details as to why it is that there is a gender gap. Where are they missing out? What is the period of their life when they are lagging behind and late compared with men? And my final L is leadership. We still today, despite some progress, granted, we still today see too few women in leadership position. That is true in parliament, in politics, in corporate world, and pretty much across the board. So if we focus on those 4 Ls, fix the law, make sure that there is no discrimination and that equality is restored so that there can be equity for all genders. If we make sure that there is education and that learning is available, if we make sure that the labor market is accessible and the salary gap in particular, but the opportunity gap as well is filled, and leadership is available and can be demonstrated by women who want it, I think we will have made huge progress.
Speaking of that last L, last year at a speech in Germany, you said, quote, female leaders possess certain qualities that can be beneficial in times of crisis. So speaking to where we are today, what did you mean by that? What is there in what qualities are you pointing to? And are there examples from your own experience that you want to reference?
I did not say that out of the blues and without some research having been done or surveys being conducted. And it was a fact during the COVID period that women in leadership position were more trusted, had a better reach to people, that were able to demonstrate more empathy and sympathy. And that was recognized as a good set of skills or inner qualities that could help lead in times of deep crisis and huge questioning about the future of our lives. So it was demonstrated by the trust that was given to those female leaders. Look at, for instance, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. She really epitomizes, in my view, that set of skills that have helped her lead her country in difficult and troubled times that saw not only COVID, but also a terrible terrorist attack at the time. There were other female leaders that demonstrated similar skill sets. It's not to renege on what men can demonstrate as well. I think that there are men who can demonstrate this, often associated to female skills as well.
And what do you make then of the idea of the glass cliff of companies putting in female leaders at a time of crisis, not necessarily because they are amazing. There are certain qualities that they want the leader to be able to carry out, but because you put women in, and the argument is that this cliff is a place for them to fail. What do you have? What does a company have to lose? Is that a legitimate thing that you've seen taking place?
Yes, I have actually, Dan. That's a very good point. I have often seen women being selected, promoted, and advocated as leaders when it's a mess. I have experienced that myself, I tell you. When I was encouraged to take the leadership at Baker McKenzie as chairman of the firm globally, the situation was very messy. There were lots of things that were completely out of control from a budget point of view. There were dissensions within the institution. Partners were at a loss as to whether or not there was really a vision. And then, surprise, surprise, why don't we ask a woman to do the job? Later on, I had a similar experience where everybody wanted to, well, not everybody, but some people wanted to take my job as Minister of Finance for France, until such time when the financial crisis hit. And at that point in time, there were not so many volunteers to take the job because it was just pretty tough, and you could only take a blow out of that situation. So it's often the case that when it's messy, when it's hard, when you run out of options, the establishment thinks, why don't we call a woman? Not much to lose. Well, it so happens that often women actually make the case that they can do it even when it's a mess.
Let's talk about what has happened in Europe in the last year with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. While mostly men are fighting and we still don't know when the war will end, it's become very evidently a crisis for women and girls, and Europe has seen over 8 million refugees so far. Can you talk about what you're seeing on the ground, how this is impacting economies in Europe?
Well, first of all, it's a horrible, unjustified invasion by one country that is Russia, of another country that is Ukraine. And it has transformed that country. It has given the Ukrainians the strength and the resilience that nobody expected, maybe not even themselves. And it's a fact that a lot of men are fighting on the front line. It's also a fact that some women have taken arms as well and have agreed to join those forces. But your point is well taken. Most of the refugees are mothers, children, and grandparents. So out of these 8 millions, I think that 80% of them are in those categories. And they have been hosted, they have been accepted by countries like Poland, like Germany. Many other countries have opened their doors and their houses in order to make sure that they have a place to stay. And many of them have wanted to return to Ukraine because that's where they feel that they belong. We at the ECB, for instance, we have a group of interns whom we have accepted in the institution in order to acquire knowledge and be in a central bank environment, which is where they came from in the main. Not all of them, but some of them. But many of those actually are studying monetary policies, are studying economics, and most of them are women. Not all of them. We have a few men as well, but most of them are women.
It's great to hear the role the ECB is playing here in helping these refugees, helping people find their footing. I want to give a shout out to some people who are joining us from the stream and some things they have to say. So Joanna from Ghana is here, Chris from Paris, Martha from Greece. You are attracting, President Lagarde, you're attracting people from all over the globe. Dr. Elizabeth Lindsay says, quote, "It is great to be joining all of you on the eve of International Women's Day." Chris Pether says, "Thank you, Madame Lagarde, for being such a strong advocate for women and diversity generally." So a lot of love coming in the stream. In your own career, you've risen to the top in both the public sector and the private sector. I wonder if there's any difference. Have you seen any difference in being a female leader at the top of either of these two worlds? And any thoughts for people who are crafting their own careers and are thinking about going either public or private?
Well, I'll tell you, Dan, I think it has been good for me to go to the private sector first and to succeed in the private sector, and then to decide that I wanted to give back and to go to the public sector. And I think that going back and forth is helpful because it enriches your experience. It gives you a broader spectrum from which you can make better informed decisions. I think the private sector was tough because you just have to prove yourself. For me, as a baby lawyer, I had to demonstrate the skill set of legal analysis, writing briefs, pleading cases, but also more difficult for a woman in those days. I'm talking 40 years ago, acquiring clients and having the ability to actually sell yourself and sell the firm. Typically, in those days, women were not really equipped to do that and felt a bit uncomfortable doing it. But to succeed on the partnership track, you just had to do it. And I think that it equips you for life when you have to do these things. You have to get out of yourself and be a little bit outside your traditional comfortable box of writing briefs and pleading cases to actually competing seriously with other lawyers from other law firms. So that was, to me, a really great experience. And it also taught me that leading is not just about having a hierarchical environment within which you can use, carrots and sticks. In a partnership, you have to convince. In a partnership, everybody is equal, and you have to, share ownership of projects. You cannot assume that you're going to get all the credits to yourself. It doesn't work that way. And I think it teaches you how to work with other team players and suppress a little bit of the ego that often goes with leadership. So how can it be useful to those who are listening to this interview? I think that, number one, we have to move from one world to the other. You cannot be, in the public sector for life. You cannot be in the private sector for life. And if you are, within any of these two, you have to move. You have to take risks. You have to continuously rejuvenate yourself and learn more. I think learning is a long process. It's not one that, ends when you finish university. You keep on learning all the time.
You really don't think anyone should stay in one of those two sectors for life? It is important to have both of them during your career?
It has been important to me because I think it has been, incredibly enriching. Not necessarily from a financial point of view, by the way. You certainly are better off from a financial point of view in the private sector than in the public sector, which is why I chose to do private sector first and to then do public sector. But it gives a completely different perspective, and the motivations are different. The incentives are different. The whole prospects are different. But it's, this is what I have gone through myself. Some people are perfectly happy being in the public sector forever because they feel that, doing public good and being one agent in this public good providing is good for them. That's fine.
Going back to the private sector for a second, certainly in the US, one of the things that people are watching are mass layoffs. And as we know, often some of the roles that are seen as the most expendable are held by women. Do you think that government needs to play a role in supporting women in this area, or should leaders be thinking, private sector leaders be thinking about this? How do you think about this idea of equity during a time of mass layoffs?
I think that there are incredible opportunities that are wasted if women are left to the side of the economic road. There have been various studies conducted by McKinsey, but also more recently by the OECD that give actually a number to how much dollar is left on the table when women are not associated with economic development and with the labor market developments. So I think it is in the economic interest of the corporate sector, but also of the public sector if they are hiring, to actually include women and make sure that there is plenty of diversity around. And it's, when I say diversity, it's not just gender diversity, it's a broader sense of diversity, in order to have just a better way of making decisions and more economic progress and success. There's plenty of studies now which have been conducted and which are based on empirical data that demonstrate that having women at the table, that having women in the workplace is actually of benefit and of profit to the organizations that embrace this aspiration of diversity and inclusion.
I'd love to go back to something that you mentioned at the very top of this discussion. Where you said when you took your current role, you insisted on being able to have your voice on topics that are not typical for a central banker.
Yeah.
Why was that so important for you? And is there a lesson in there for other people on demanding to be able to have your voice heard?
Yes, Dan, it was important to me because in all the jobs that I have done, all the positions that I've held, I have always tried to bring other women, to make sure that women were at the table and could participate in the process. And there was no reason in the world for me, even as a central bank governor, head of the ECB, to shut that voice down and to forget about this concern that I've had all my life. So I made the point very clearly in Parliament. I said, if you vote for me, bear in mind that I will continue to have a voice on those issues. So yes, it was important to me. I was lucky in my life to meet some extraordinary women. And one of them was Madeleine Albright, who has passed now. But Madeleine was always a strong advocate of women as well. And the end of her first book is very clear. And it says, there should be a special place in hell for women who do not support women. I have met Madeleine several times. We sat together on those issues of women in leadership, of women in politics, of women on boards, because she was also very concerned about that. And I think she's right. And we have to just give each other's a hand. And that's my way of doing it.
And weren't you nervous at all? I would think that if for some other people, they would have said, this is one of the biggest jobs in the world. I'm going to make Parliament unhappy here. They are not going to vote for me. Or to you, was it a deal breaker? This was it. They could either have the full you or not have it.
Yeah, that was it. I was not prepared to compromise on that.
That's great. Okay, well, I want to do some more shout outs here. We've got Natalia, from Canada, Caroline Emile from Normandy, France, Joellen from California, and we're seeing a lot in the comments right now about the 4 Ls. I know that is something that you have talked about a lot. It certainly continues to resonate with people as they think about how to govern their own lives and think about the role of women in the economy. So I want to finish, if you don't mind, with one last question, which is, when managing an economic crisis, you've said it's crucial to act quickly and boldly while maintaining good communications. Would love that communications part, to me, I think is so interesting, because you can just think, oh, well, I've got to act quickly and boldly. Why do you put communication in there?
Because in central banking, communication is one of the tools in the toolbox. There are other elements. Interest rates is clearly the one that we're using at the moment. We will use all the tools that we have, and we will do whatever is needed to return inflation to 2%, which is our target for price stability. But communication is one component that is used, and that is very efficiently used in some instances. So it's an art. I'm not pretending that I master it to perfection. I work on it. I constantly work on it, and I strive to improve. And I think that many other central bank governors around the world are in the same position as me. They know that when they speak, when they comment, when they explain, it actually carries a long way in trying to implement the monetary policy that has been decided.
It's such a great point. It is definitely not something that is taught in macroeconomics when you hear about the levers that the central banks hold in thinking about moving or stabilizing the economy. So it's a great point. And I think a lot of people who watch this interview today or have seen you over the years would strongly disagree with your point about not being an expert communicator. Clearly, you know exactly how to get the message across. You're inspiring to a lot of people. And I think you've given us a lot to think about here. So President Lagarde, thank you so much for joining us on the eve of International Women's Day. And I hope to see you again here soon.
Have a good Women's Day tomorrow, and everybody else too.
That was European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde. Thank you all for joining. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more, we release This Is Working as a podcast and as a newsletter. You can follow the newsletter by clicking on or typing in the link that you see on the screen now. I am Daniel Roth, LinkedIn's editor-in-chief. Thanks for tuning in. See you soon.